Before the Second World War began, National Socialism swept across Germany as Adolf Hitler rose to power. We associate Hitler and the Nazis with gripping the German nation, but to oppose Hitler and his party was an incredibly dangerous thing to do. The Nazis established a police state that allowed them to hunt down any resistors or those who completely defied the Führer and his policies and politics. To do so, however, could see someone being thrown into a concentration camp or even face execution. Today we look at an amazing but tragic story featuring Sophie Scholl, whose anti-Nazi political activism saw her in great danger and trouble, which resulted at the age of 21 in her execution. So join us today as we look at the tragic execution of Sophie Scholl, the White Rose, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Sophie Magdalena Scholl was born on the 9th of May 1921, the daughter of a liberal and consistent critic of the Nazis, Robert Scholl. She was the fourth of 6 children in her family, and her father was the elected mayor of Fürstenberg, and in power he managed to do a few things over the next few years. Sophie's father was a strong opponent of Hitler, and their father was greatly upset when her brother Hans joined the Hitler Youth, and Sophie and her sisters joined the League of German Girls. At the time it was normal for children to join these groups, but within these there would be a significant amount of brainwashing and manipulation that would take place to get the children to think in the Nazi way. Boys who joined the Hitler Youth would conduct exercises such as learning how to shoot and march, and they were prepared for military service later in life. So by making boys join the Hitler Youth, the Nazis were in a sense building an army for decades later. Girls who joined the League of German Girls were prepared for life inside of the house, and would be taught domestic tasks and household tasks, such as cooking and also raising a family. The Nazis and Hitler promoted Germans having as many children as possible, and with this Hitler would grow his army, and women were even encouraged to have lots of children, being given financial grants, relief from taxes and even medals. Sophie Scholl began to excel in the League of German Girls and became a group leader. She was noted to have been rather eloquent and well behaved. Her brother Hans also showed good leadership skills and became a local leader within the Hitler Youth, and both of the siblings' memberships to these groups caused great problems for her father. Hans Scholl in fact was even chosen to be the flag bearer for his unit in the Nuremberg Rally in 1936. However, the siblings would begin to become disillusioned with Adolf Hitler and his Nazi government. Hans Scholl had become a member of another non-Nazi group for young people, and the associations with this group were to do with arts, music and literature. Hans was active in one of these groups known as the German Youth Movement, and he and many of Sophie's friends were arrested for this. Sophie had also begun to read literature and poems by writers who were seemingly banned under the Nazi state, and Sophie did have trouble at school. She came into contact with teachers who did not support the Nazis, and those who didn't were sacked. One of the most popular teachers at her school disappeared, and in spring 1940, Sophie would graduate from secondary school. She then became a kindergarten teacher and chose this job as she hoped it would mean she wouldn't have to join the National Labour Service, which all students who wished to be admitted to university would have to do a 6-month stint working for. Eventually in 1941, to get into university she had to do a stint as a nursery school teacher in the Auxiliary War Service. The military-style regime of the Labour Service had an impact on her, and she began to practice passive resistance. In May 1942, she became a student at the University of Munich, studying biology and philosophy, and her brother Hans was studying medicine there. She became part of a group of Hans' friends who were known for their political beliefs and would bond over their love of arts and music. They spent their time going to concert, plays, walking, and doing the sorts of activities normal young adults would do. However, in Munich, Sophie met a number of different artists who questioned the Nazi beliefs and ideals, and these people questioned how to conform under a dictatorship. Sophie was influenced by her philosophy teacher Kurt Huber, who taught that all human beings had the ability to reason and should have the freedom to exercise this and not accept the orders of authority. In July 1942, Hans Scholl and a few of his friends were sent to the Eastern Front during the Second World War to work as medics. During their time in Poland and the Soviet Union, they personally saw examples of many of the atrocities and war crimes being committed by the Wehrmacht, and this made them even more sour towards the Nazi government. They also had to treat a huge number of wounded soldiers, and they began to realise that Germany could not win a war. Following returning from the Eastern Front, Hans Scholl was compelled to take action. From the end of June to the middle of July 1942, the group of friends that Sophie and Hans belonged to began to write 4 leaflets. In these they quoted from different aspects of theology and appealed to the German public to listen to different teachings such as the Bible or Aristotle rather than Hitler. These initial leaflets were then left in telephone books in public phone booths, sent to professors and students, and then taken to other universities to be distributed. In autumn 1942, Sophie Scholl found out that her brother was one of the authors of these leaflets, and she joined the group now known as the White Rose. In January 1943, the 5th leaflet, titled Appeal to All Germans, was published in around 8,000 copies and was taken to different German cities at the end of the month. Copies appeared in many towns such as Cologne, Vienna and even Berlin. At this time the White Rose tried to address the whole population, and the name of the group became known as the German Resistance Movement. The writing became less intellectual, and the leaflets carried undertones that the war was lost and that Hitler was not the way for Germany to go. At the end of January 1943, it was clear that the Second World War for Germany was not going well, with the Battle of Stalingrad ending with a near total loss of the 6th Army. The war was turning against the Germans, and this inspired resistance movements across occupied territory, such as the Partisans, and the defeat at Stalingrad greatly affected German morale. At Munich University, where Sophie was attending, there was even a student riot which broke out, and this then encouraged the members of the White Rose. When the defeat of Stalingrad was officially announced, they sent out their final leaflet. This was authored by Sophie's philosophy teacher Kurt Huber and made more patriotic by Hans Scholl. The final leaflet called on people to now take a stand against the Nazi government, as it was leading to a complete destruction of Germany. Hans Scholl and 2 friends also then began to write slogans and graffiti with slogans such as "Down with Hitler" and "Freedom" on buildings around Munich. On the 18th of February 1943, Sophie and Hans Scholl arrived at Munich University with a suitcase packed full with their leaflets. They'd spotted a link between the leaflets and unrest within the student population of the university, and they wanted to take advantage. According to Sophie's sister Inga Scholl, they arrived at the university, and since the lecture rooms were open in a few minutes, they quickly decided to deposit the leaflets in the corridors. They then disposed of the remainder by letting the sheets fall from the top level of a staircase down into the entrance hall. Relieved they were about to go, but a pair of eyes had spotted them. It was as if the eyes had been detached from their owner and turned into the automatic spyglasses of the dictatorship. The doors of the building were immediately locked, and the fate of the brother and sister was sealed. So what the siblings had done was distributed their anti-Nazi propaganda and leaflets, and then had thrown them from the windows down onto the floor below. Following this, Jacob Schmidt, a janitor, then informed the Gestapo immediately, and both of the siblings were arrested. During the investigations, the police found a handwritten draft of another leaflet, and one by one the members of the White Rose began to be arrested. Sophie and Hans were not allowed a defence lawyer, and Sophie was interrogated all night long. During this, she was told that the Gestapo had found evidence in her brother's room that proved she was guilty of drafting one of the leaflets. Sophie then began to confess her activities, and in a show of strength refused to give any information about the rest of the group that could possibly lead to any of them being implicated. Their trial began on the next Monday morning, and the trial was a sign of Nazi power. In the eyes of the judge, who was in no doubt sympathetic to the Nazis, as the party controlled the courts, Sophie was most probably guilty as soon as she walked in. Robert Scholl was initially refused to attend the trial, but managed to push his way past guards, and he did speak with Judge Roland Freisler. The judge then ordered the Scholl family out of the court, with Robert being dragged out of the courtroom screaming. Later that day, Sophie and Hans Scholl were found guilty of treason. The judge said how the accused of, by means of leaflet in a time of war, called for sabotage of the war efforts and armaments for the overthrow of the National Socialist way of life of our people, have propagated defeatist ideas, and most vulgarly defamed the Führer, thereby giving aid to the enemy of the Reich and weaken the armed security of the nation. On this account they are to be punished by death. Their honour and rights as citizens are forfeited for all time. Robert and Magdalena Scholl managed to visit their children before they were executed. Sophie's mother Magdalena said to her then 21-year-old daughter that I'll never see you come through the door again, and Sophie replied that, "Oh mother, after all it's only a few years more life I'll miss." Sophie then told her parents that she and her brother were proud that they had not betrayed no one and had taken a large part of the blame for the White Rose's actions on their shoulders. Hours after being found guilty of treason, on the 22nd of February 1943, the death sentence would be carried out. Executioner Johann Reichhart would be the executioner for the day, a man who executed thousands in Germany over decades, and he later stated how he'd never seen anyone die as bravely as Sophie Scholl did. Her last words before she was guillotined and beheaded by the Nazis were, "Such a fine sunny day, and I have to go, but what does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?" During Hitler's time as Führer, he beheaded those who he believed to have been traitors, and Sophie Scholl suffered the same fate. The execution took place at 5 p.m. at Stadelheim Prison in Munich. Present was the Reich prosecutor overseeing the execution and a few other officials. At 5 p.m. the chamber for the execution had been prepared, and the prison warden and senior government officials, along with the prison doctor, were standing by. Reichhart, the executioner, along with his assistants, were ready, as were the prison staff, and the chamber was secured from the outside so no one could see in. The guillotine was prepared for use and was hidden behind a black cloth. At 5 p.m. Sophie Scholl was brought forward by 2 male prison officials, and the overseer of the execution confirmed her identity, and then the proceedings were handed over to the executioner. Reichhart's assistant led her to the guillotine, and she was moved with her head placed under the blade of the guillotine. It was then that executioner Johann Reichhart released the blade, and the blade immediately severed her head from her torso. The prison doctor then confirmed the death of Sophie Scholl. It was said that she was calm and collected, and it only took 6 seconds from Sophie Scholl being placed on the guillotine to the time in which the blade fell. From the time in which she left the cell to her death, it was only 48 seconds. Following Sophie's death, her body was then moved into a coffin and transferred to a cemetery, and today her grave lies near to Stadelheim Prison in Munich. Sophie Scholl was a bright light in resistance against the Nazis, but like so many times in history, defying a monarch or a dictator and their beliefs usually ends in one way. At the heart of this story was a 21-year-old girl who wished to make Germany better for herself and younger people by standing up incredibly bravely against one of history's most evil men and regimes. Sophie Scholl was certainly an incredibly noble and immensely talented and courageous lady whose story should not be forgotten. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.